Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am going to let Snehal introduce himself, but he today is going to talk about AI-powered cybersecurity. And with that, over to you.
All right, thank you. So my name is Snehal Antani. I'm the co-founder CEO at Horizon3.ai. My background, I was a CIO within financial services at GE Capital out in New York. I was the CTO at Splunk that brought me to the West Coast here in San Francisco. And then I left to serve within the US Department of Defense within US Special Operations following Splunk. And after that, I started Horizon 3. And so my background is really in that software engineering, systems architecture, defensive cyber, offensive cyber, and really looking at the cyber problem from each of those perspectives. As a CIO, as the CEO securing my own business, in military operations, and so on. What I'm going to talk about today is the role of AI in cyber, and in particular, the role of AI in offensive cyber. What I want to start with is a story. So in 2022, allegedly the Japanese provided support to the Ukrainians, and the Russians got angry and ransomwared a small company in Tokyo. That company in Tokyo provided cup holders to Toyota Motor Company. And due to just-in-time logistics and lean manufacturing, Toyota ended up having to shut down 28 production lines, and it cost them nearly $400 million of economic damage over cup holders. And the flex here was not that a small company could be ransomware. The flex was the Russians knowing where to apply the least amount of effort to cause the maximum amount of economic harm. And so what we are doing is entering this era of cyber-enabled economic warfare. And in that era, we are not going to initiate military action over cup holders, right? And so there are a set of things that can be done in the cyber realm that are below the threshold for war. So what that means for us as cybersecurity practitioners is a few things. The first is, as a CIO, I can no longer only secure my own enterprise IT. I also have to worry about securing my critical suppliers, like the cup holder company, and my critical distributors to make sure my goods make it to market. So my attack surface has suddenly increased in scope and complexity. The second challenge for me as a defender is observing the shift from extortion to business disruption. When you think about ransomware in cybersecurity, ransomware was really a CFO, cyber insurance, extortion risk mitigation problem. It was, well, if we get ransomware, we're probably gonna have to pay out $1 million. Let's make sure we have cyber insurance that covers at least $1 million so that we don't have to take from our own cash on hand. Well, that extortion in this new era is less interesting or less important to what we saw happen to Toyota, where it's about using cyber-enabled economic warfare to achieve national security or strategic outcomes, disrupting critical companies, disrupting critical supply chains for munitions that support your war machine, or going after food and agriculture and other things to cause challenges within the electorate. Or imagine stacking an attack where you are hacking a ship in the Suez Canal and jamming up the Suez Canal while attacking Colonial Pipeline, while attacking a refinery. And if you do those three things with the right influence operations and influence warfare, suddenly gas prices jump from $4 or $5 a gallon to $40 or $50 a gallon. And if you are doing that a couple of days before an election, you can actually use cyber-enabled outcomes to affect the political trajectory of a nation. And so we're in this new era, and at the same time, it's being conflated or compounded with a dramatic change in capability. So the change in capability is the role of AI in offensive cyber operations. So there was an article that came out from Microsoft around the role of AI in OpenAI and others on how to use AI to execute a cyber attack. And I'm going to show you a really simple example of using ChatGPT for target selection. This is what a nation state or a ransomware gang or some adversary is going to go off and do. I don't really know much about automobile manufacturing, but I asked this question. I work at Ford. I want to understand what the critical components are in manufacturing the Ford F-150, the most popular truck in America. And I get a quick list of 10 key components that I should start thinking about and researching for target selection. There are the semiconductor and electronic components. There's the transmission components, rare earth elements. Okay, this gives me a little bit of a starting point. And I continued to dig, and within 10 minutes, I was able to quickly identify an interesting group of targets to get after. And in there, I looked at, well, what are companies that are critical suppliers to the Ford F-150 or big car manufacturing lines? Lear Corporation provides the seating and electrical systems. Borg Warner provides the powertrain components. Tenneco provides the ride performance and suspension components. And if I scroll down, there was a really interesting company with not a lot of employees. And usually your cybersecurity posture is a function of how large your company is. So if you're a really large company like Lear, you're going to have a decent amount of cybersecurity budget and cybersecurity maturity. But if you only have 5,000 or 3,000 or 1,000 employees, you're probably not going to have that same level of investment. So as an attacker, suddenly I see a really interesting target to go off and research. And that target provides automatic dimming rear view mirrors, something that an American car cannot be sold without, which means if I can get after and disrupt the supply of rear view mirrors, I'm going to disrupt the supply of trucks to the market and could cause a lot of economic damage to a critical industry. So this is just an example of the role Gen AI plays in target selection. It's a very basic example. We can all go off and do this to understand who to get after. But now imagine this on steroids with a highly motivated, well-resourced, and highly skilled attacker or an attack team that's able to accelerate the process of target selection and then accelerate the process of actual attack. That's really what the article from a couple of months ago came out from OpenAI, Microsoft, and others, which was that Gen AI is being used in offensive cyber attacks. Now, this was interesting, but not overly compelling. And here's what I mean. What they really talked about was using OSINT to research a target, like I just demonstrated. The next thing they talked about was using Gen AI to deliver effective spear phishing attacks or campaigns. Think of it as using Gen AI to write highly tailored, highly accurate emails to convince the CEO or CFO of a company to click on a link. And then finally, using Gen AI to accelerate the process of researching systems and protocols for you to understand how to compromise and how to attack. But to be honest, I kind of view these as just a more powerful Google search. You know, what is the true effect of AI and offensive cyber, and what is that going to look like? And that's really the area I focused on when we started Horizon 3, was around AI for true offensive cyber operations. And when you think about what that means, it's about autonomous agents that can actually execute a cyber attack with no humans involved. Now, the good guys are going to call that running a pen test, a penetration test. So there's a synonymous cyber attack is run by the bad guys, a penetration test is run by the good guys, but they're both effectively doing the same thing under the covers, which is compromising your environment to achieve a goal. For us, our autonomous agents were able to compromise a bank in 7 minutes and 19 seconds back in 2022. That was quite fast. That should have taken humans multiple days to multiple weeks to achieve the same thing. Well, a year later, as the algorithm and systems got better, it took us 4 minutes and 12 seconds to fully compromise a bank. And we expect sometime we got there kind of late last year, but sometime in the next few months, we're going to be able to get to sub 60 seconds in being able to know nothing about the environment, discover that environment, and conduct a full profile attack and gain access to every critical system and credential and infrastructure within a target organization. As a human defending an environment, can you in 60 seconds or less characterize the threat, get approval to take some action to stop the threat, and then actually stifle the attack? And the answer is probably not. I mean, 60 seconds is not a lot of time. And so my thesis here is that the future of cyber warfare will be algorithms fighting algorithms with humans by exception. And really, we're going to start to see this, I think, accelerate in the next 6 months, especially when open source capabilities like DeepSeek and Llama and others start to become prevalent in these attacker communities. So a big issue here is most people don't understand the anatomy of a cyber attack. For most, it's just reading the headline and kind of getting a rough idea. but the actual methodology and technique is held by not a lot of people globally, 20 to 30,000 people that are certified penetration testers. And when you think about an attack, an attacker is going to gain access to your system one way or another. There are just way too many doors and windows in your company to prevent an attacker from not getting in. And so organizations assume breach. They assume the bad guys are going to gain initial access on at least one host. And so when you assume breach, you assume the attacker gains access to a single host. And from that host, the attacker or our autonomous agent is going to conduct recon and discover everything that is network reachable from that host. From there, like an attacker, you're going to organize that reconnaissance into a data structure that represents the cyber terrain that you've discovered. Every host, every port, every service, every password, every user ID, interesting piece of data, all of that is data that needs to be modeled and used to describe the cyber terrain to go off and attack. And then based on that cyber terrain, an attacker is going to look for ideal or common landmarks. For example, virtual appliances that manage storage servers like Veeam or HPILO and other services like that are an example landmark that attackers are going to get after because they are straightforward to exploit. They're usually not monitored by the security team. They tend to store very important user IDs and passwords. And so it's a very ideal landmark to see. And there are hundreds of thousands of landmarks that attackers go after initially within an organization. And so as you identify one of those landmarks, you're able to get code execution and actually compromise that particular host, successfully access user IDs and passwords stored within that host, use those user IDs and passwords to log into a neighboring machine, and then on that neighboring machine, identify databases or file shares or other sources of data that are accessible from that machine. In this case, there was a share drive, and that share drive had the credentials for the AWS production cloud environment stored locally, and we were able to find those shared credentials and then gain access to the cloud system. What's amazing here are three different things. The first, not a single human was involved in this attack, nor was there any prior knowledge of the environment. This attack was executed completely autonomously by an autonomous agent that was able to conduct recon, discovery, plan, and actually execute the attack. The second thing is not a single security alert was triggered within the bank's defenses. And that's because the early landmarks tend to be landmarks within the blind spots of a bank or of any organization, and attackers know this. That's why so many cyber attacks go undetected because of how many blind spots there are. And then the third thing is, what are the precise actions to go off and do? Well, step one, delete that AWS credentials file from the share drive. It should have never been there. Step two, go patch that HPILO server that gave us the initial credentials. And then step three is improve logging and monitoring of those critical accounts so that you preserve decision space to actually stifle the attack. So when you look at what this means for us as an industry, there is a significant constraint of supply in ethical hackers and penetration testers. And so if you're thinking about starting an AI company, what's really interesting in starting an AI company is looking for extreme shortages in labor while there's an increasing demand in that labor or in those particular outcomes. And so for me, penetration testing was the ideal area to get after. There are only 20,000 certified penetration testers globally. It takes 10 years to become a senior pen tester. And in the meantime, there's significant demand due to increased compliance requirements, growing attack surface, and so on. And when you think about the role of AI in attack, and I use penetration testing and bad actor hacking interchangeably. It's just a matter of your motivation. One group is doing it for good and the other group is doing it for bad. And really the big chasm here is the role that AI systems are going to play in accelerating the attack, as I talked about earlier. And I'm going to advance just in the interest of time to make sure I complete with enough time for questions. So what does a system, an autonomous system for attack look like? When you think about the underlying engine for autonomous systems, effectively what you look for are a few pieces. The first is the ability to define goals or outcomes. So in the context of penetration testing or hacking, those goals and outcomes are, can I become domain administrator in your network? That means the attacker has the keys to the kingdom. Can I access sensitive data? Can I compromise a particular host? That's interesting. So these are goals that you want to go off and achieve as an attacker. The next thing is to plan. What are the next best actions to execute in order to increase the probability of achieving those goals? And that's where you start off with an initial set of landmarks. Go after those virtual appliances to manage storage devices. Go after domain controllers or specific pieces of software you know are not very secure. From there, you're going to actually take action. So in the context of penetration testing or hacking, it's about having an initial library of exploits or ways to compromise systems available to you. And you're going to select the right exploit on the right server at the right time against that target network. And as you invoke that exploit or that command, you're going to sense or receive a bunch of telemetry from that target network. And that's where you start to create that context window. And so the interesting thing about penetration testing is a host you gained access to at, say, minute 2 of a pen test may not be interesting at all until minute 5,000 or minute 100,000. And suddenly that host you found early is key to advancing or progressing the attack. So the context window in penetration testing is massive because, and it's also very detailed, because one minor thing at minute 2 could be a key enabler to a major outcome many hours or many days down the road as you start to discover new ways to attack. The next part is coordinating all of these steps and then gathering all of the insights so you can convey to the end user what happened and what to do about it. And that's where you start to get into this idea of deterministic narratives or using deterministic LLM type architectures to tell a story of your security posture, where if you run a prompt today and you run the same prompt tomorrow, in ChatGPT, you're going to get two different answers or slightly different answers. That's not acceptable in a highly regulated and compliance-centric market. Any change in that narrative must be explained. And therefore, narratives in the realm of compliance must be deterministic and must be fully explainable. So that's kind of the initial foray into the role of autonomy for attack. But as we saw even in news earlier this week, the importance of reinforcement learning in improving attack, where you start to understand insights from lots of different pen tests that have been run. The more pen tests you run, the smarter the system should get. And the way that happens is the more pen tests you run, the more landmarks get discovered and added to the landmark repository. The more interesting pieces of software or systems that we should go off and target as an attacker. You can't expect to know all of that up front. You're going to discover that over time as you encounter more and more environments. The other part here is interesting pieces of software that justify zero-day research. So for example, each of these vendors is a contributor to CISA key exploitable vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that are massively exploited by the bad guys. Well, when you have enough data from running pen tests, you're going to be able to understand where to target your very exquisite and very hard to find talent, able to find 0 days in custom software. And then from there, you're going to go off and do that. Yep.
Hey, forgive me. I know you're flying blind right now.
Yep.
We have about 40 seconds left, and everyone's going to get pushed to the next one. This has been super interesting.
Awesome. Well, let me end with, and you can take a screenshot of the key takeaways, which is the following. Your attack surface is much larger. Thanks to DeepSeek and others, the barriers of entry of cyber warfare are much lower. Data is critical to building AI systems. And so if you struggled with implementing business intelligence projects, you're going to struggle with AI. And so understanding how to leverage your data as an asset is paramount to AI success. So thanks for the time. And I'm available for questions if you want to hit me on LinkedIn or contact me through Twitter, and I'll happily answer anything you've got.
Awesome. Thank you. Incredible session.
Thanks.